Good morning, everyone. Hi, Shamsher. Hi, Shristi.
Hello, good morning, Ishita.
Good
Good morning,
morning.
everyone.
So, I was wondering, so if you wanted to just have an informal conversation about introducing your projects, Soni, Tonisha, Shwetal, Geeta, so
Yeah,
they'll
sure,
get to know you. Yes, please go ahead.
sure. Hi, Shamsher. Hi, Shristi. Very
Hello.
nice to have you. My work is on you know collecting Sindhi books. These were some books that were given away to me because I was the one who was trying to struggle with some reading material as I was picking up the reading of language. So I got this as a personal archive. I got them archived and got them uploaded on archive.org also. But I realized that nothing was happening with that material. So now I'm thinking of having a dedicated digital archive for these books, which I will annotate and also, if possible, make it available in three different scripts: Perso-Arabic, Devanagari, and Roman script. So the typical thing with the Sindhi situation in India is when Sindhis came after partition, they were scattered in different places. So we do not have one dedicated place where all books are available. And these books are so old, the publishers have died, and no one is in fact publishing these books, apart from maybe say Sahitya Academy publishing one or two odd books and all that. So we are losing this um, very interesting heritage. I don't know, products or what I. So I'm trying to do something so that at least this man's private library is preserved digitally. That's my agenda for this May. After that, I'm looking at oral narratives and things like that, but one thing at a time.
Thank you, Soni. Tonisha, do you want to take over?
Sure. Hi,
Mhm.
Shamsher, Shristi, it's good to
Hi.
meet you. I'm sorry, it's Parker territory here. So, I am working on stories from the Sundarbans area that encompasses the West Bengal part of India and Bangladesh. Now, the focus is on different kinds of stories, not just the textual literary sources coming from, say, Kolkata, more mainstream ones, but also oral folklores, local accounts. And the aim is to create a digital archive that would be somewhat interactive and would take in community participation and shared authorship in itself. So, the goal for a project of this kind is to problematize the existing politics of representation. You know, most representations of Sundarbans come from Kolkata and places, and local knowledges often get ignored or sidetracked as not modern enough. So, but we have the focus will stay on stories, different kinds of stories, and to present them at a sort of parity with a sense of interactiveness going in there. That's the plan. Thank you.
Shwetal?
Yeah, I'm an artist, I'm a designer, educator, and what I'm working on is so I have documented the Navratri of Baroda, the city of Baroda, and I'm at this moment trying to archive all the material that I have collected during the making of the documentary and also later the material that I get. So, yes, that is where I am. I have a lot of material in terms of footage, photographs, text, books, and yeah, even artifacts to some extent. So, yeah.
Geeta ji? Um,
Morning, everybody,
Good
and
morning.
hello, Samsher and Shristi. I am into my heritage activities, and I have now just taken a small project which I want to see its daylight by April second week. So I am collecting memories of my husband through his colleagues, friends, and relatives, how he was perceived. This is basically for my granddaughter, whom she has not seen her grandfather, and he was too keen to see her. So I just want her to know that this is the man who everybody calls so and so, and these are the values he stood for. And she is a Swedish citizen, so a little bit of the Indian values for what we stand for, maybe hopefully will be integrated into her is the first purpose. Second purpose is I have been telling people, document your personal history. There are so many interesting facets. It also throws lights on the prevailing times at that time. You get to understand that how they were living, the conditions. They may not have been as privileged, but still they made the best out of it. But nobody seems to have got the message, and I thought this is a good opportunity for me to put into action, stating that how wonderful it is to document personal histories. So that's it. And I want to bring out this book wherein it will have photographs, relevant photographs, and where the matter has not got photographs, there will be some illustrations. I want to make some caricatures at the end, and then also have this scanning by which some people who cannot write but who will express their memories. So I want to make it a comprehensive so that it appeals to all the people. It should not only be for the people who know him, but somebody who takes it, they should feel not bad. It is something very interesting. Why don't I take a leave? Because he was an exceptionally person who touched people's lives, and he was really revered in his profession. Because I myself was very surprised. Why this whole thing came was I received messages from colleagues and his friends, and the amount of respect and love they had, it was something mind-boggling to such an extent I had to think, do I know this person? Because he's entirely different as a professional and entirely different as a personal. So with that idea, I'm coming up with this project, and I hope it will come out well because of the short time. But still, let's see, I've made a beginning, because this is going to be a 3-part happening over 3 years. That's it.
Thank you, Geeta ji.
Thank you,
Aparna?
Geeta. Ishita, can I just
Yes,
small
please.
query from Geeta ji? Thank you, Geeta ji. Can I just take the liberty to ask what did he do in terms
No,
of?
he was the general manager of Bosch, and he was the architect of many policies in Bosch, which is even for being followed today. And he has made a software which is accepted worldwide, and it has been tinkered to Indian conditions. So that's why, even though he retired about 7 to 8 years back, I used to see people calling him, and he walking through all those steps. So I say, why are you doing such a thankless job? He would only smile. It was later I came to know that he's the architect, and he is the one who has done all the steps and the software itself, because he was very good at applications. So I didn't know that.
So wonderful. Thank you, Geeta ji.
Thank you so much. Aparna, welcome. Good morning. We were just going through informal introductions of what you all are working on, because that's something which hasn't been shared with Shamsher and Shristi. Do you want
I would just like to add one more. I
Yeah.
saw Aparna Raman's book about her grandmother's things, and I am going to take a leaf from that, and it is a second edition of my project.
Oh, okay. Geeta, where did you see it?
I saw it at what is that place where Ishita
at the exhibition?
exhibition.
Construction.
So beautifully made and so nicely written.
It's a part of your archival box
Yes.
at Sandal Soap Factory Metro Station.
Oh, yes.
I was very impressed, and suddenly an idea struck me that second year, that is how it is going to be about the things that define my husband.
Oh,
So,
Are you talking about the book titled Precious?
yes. Yes.
yes,
The thin one. Yes. Yeah.
It had your grandmother's first thing, some chest and all that, her blouse, something and all that. So that was very, very fascinating, even though I don't know who this grandmother of yours is, but the way you put it, it really inspired me. I should have this as a second project in the next year.
Yeah, so that was memory completely based on material memory.
Yes.
And they were actually written by children. So my project includes connecting generations.
Oh.
So in a workshop on material memory, the kids had to, all of them had to engage with a senior member of their family and get a narrative around a family object, a family owned object, and then trace the migration of that object, and thereby the narrative is written from the perspective of the object.
Very interesting. I think I will also follow that. And I
Yeah.
hope some more people will think it is very important to document family histories.
Yes. Thank you, Geeta.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes, Aparna.
So, hi everyone. Hi, Shamsher. And I don't know if we met. We didn't meet yesterday, right?
No, Shamsher and Shristi was there yesterday, but
Mm,
she was able to join today.
right. So I work at the Srishti Institute of Design, and I also run a publishing house which operates on a by kids for kids model. And as part of that, there's an initiative called Storylines, which is about connecting narratives between generations. And that's why there was this outcome called Precious, which Geeta was just talking about. I'm also interested in documenting family histories and in oral histories, preserving them for future generations. Um, of late, so I have a number of photographs, stamps, letters that go back to pre-independence. And I'm very interested in a living histories project. So in talking to family members who have lived through historical events like independence, the Bengal famine, so on and so forth. Even the World War. So I have, in fact, of late, I've started recording interviews based on those recollections, and now I find that from archiving, my journey has slightly kind of bifurcated to include like another trail, which is trying to test if the lived histories using elders in the family can be used to as a pedagogical aid in classrooms so that history can be understood in a more personalized manner. Otherwise, typically something like the World War is very distant and removed from our reality. But if the memories can be shared for anything, it could even be independence or just post-independence, depending on the seniority of the elders. I have a feeling that it could help children in classrooms engage with people and places and histories and geographies in a more holistic construct rather than just memorizing certain dates and wars, and which is what it essentially is. So that's where I am today, and memory is my primary focus of interest, and I've been doing a number of conferences on about various looking at memory through various lenses.
And I'm very happy to have the two presenters whom we invited, and they immediately said yes. I'll start with Shamsher Singh, who's going to present first. Before I read out the formal introduction, I would love to share how we know each other. I think that's very crucial. So we met at Millie sessions. So those of you who don't know, it would be useful to start following Millie, which is a group of accidental archivists passionate about this subject and wanting to put down a formal body in place, which will generate tools for more and better archiving to happen. So it's really a cause-driven collective which has come together, started by 2-3 different people, and now we are a group of at least 30-ish, 40-ish who are like hard, like core, and we work harder on it. But then, of course, the list of Millie sessions goes beyond, I think, 200 or 300 archives or archiving projects, not just from the country, but also from neighboring countries in South Asia. And Millie sessions, what I refer to is an annual program that's been happening since last 3 years to mark International Archives Week, which happens in June, first week of June. So you might want to watch out that space. I'll share Millie's link after I finish the introduction. So last year, what happened at Millie was, instead of doing a public forum, we focused more on working meetings. We met and we started working on certain aspects, and the group or the team where Shamsher and I have been working is focused on public engagement, as you would presume of my interests, public engagement of archives. And one of the things we have discussed more so between both of us is what does it mean for digital archives, and archives with contestations to also raise or make space for public engagement. So what are the pros and cons of creating such a space, and what is it supposed to do? So how much is curation, how much is archiving in that domain? So, and serendipitously, Shamsher wrote to me about his archive being digitally ready, and I said, instead of me looking at it alone, why don't we all look at it together? So that's how Shamsher is here, and I'm very, very excited to listen to what has conspired finally. Shamsher teaches sociology at Flame University, Pune. He has worked as a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Management in Agriculture, IIM Ahmedabad. He has also been involved in carrying out village studies to understand the agrarian relation and conditions across different states in India. He has both academic and research interests around the broad themes of agrarian relations, agrarian politics, quality of life, labor, and migration. So this explains that his interest in the protests and the archive that emerged, but also that he was really the anchor in terms of curating and archiving, building the digital platform. So we get to know the story from the heart himself. Thank you, Shamsher, for accepting the invitation and bringing this project here for the first conversation. I think once the platform has been ready,
Yes, yes.
we are very happy and privileged that you are here.
Thank you. Thank you, Shita. Thanks, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to discuss my work here. And this, I didn't know about this particular platform. I was familiar, as Ishita explained. I was kind of following Ishita's work, but it's wonderful to see this particular initiative, which is now in its fifth year. Well, what I will do is I'll share a PPT, and then in between of my slides, I'll also keep coming back to the archive website. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's come up.
Yes. So this is the archive logo, which has been designed by Shayantan Bose, who is currently a freelance designer and digital content creator. So the website address of the archive is pafp.in. You'll be also able to find it by its full name, People's Archive of Farmers Protest. Now, I know Ishita gave a very good kind of background to how we connected and how the Millie workshop, and I consider having meeting all these group during the Millie workshop last year, which was June 2022, right? Ishita?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It kind of changed me. I started taking this work more seriously, to be honest, and it changed. It contributed a lot in terms of how I would pursue this particular exercise. So basically, how I see this work, and not only the work of this project, but also the larger people-centric archive, which some of you also are engaged. And it was really interesting to hear some of you have a focus in terms of community participation, or the community focus of your documentation or of your archives. And even when there are personal archives of family and family members, they largely also contribute to the people and to the communities. So my work also kind of in a way fits into that domain. But what I particularly interested was that And to be honest, it was not entirely my idea, but I'm going to come to that, what kind of materialized the idea behind a People's Archive. We are quite familiar, I'm sure, that there have been a very rich tradition of documenting and preserving the movement which have been organized by people. And my particular interest was in the agrarian mobilizations. Because I study, agriculture and rural society. So India and elsewhere also, there has been a lot of documentation of the agrarian mobilizations and people's mass mobilizations. In India, if we talk about this, it goes back, more than 100 years, even in the pre-independence era. There were several people's revolts, agrarian mobilizations, etc. Tebhaga, Telangana, Adivasi Bidrohs, Varli in the post-independence era in Maharashtra. There were various kinds of movements which were taking place. Now, one of the limitations of such documentation was that this was primarily in the kind of form of academic literature or academic publications, and people, those who were center of these movements or these actions, were kind of not able to access the richness of what they have done. So it was restricted in the sense of its audience, and it was not a kind of people's participation in the sense of consuming that content afterwards. Now, it is also true that a lot of movement also disappear from public memory, and there is the dust of time covers what were the conditions under which these movements took place, how people organized themselves, what was the main objective of those movements. So with time, these memories also get kind of blurred, or they disappear from the larger public domain. And again, as I mentioned, that there is the dissemination of these kind of resources is not really widespread, but the recent surge in the digital platforms has made this slightly possible, that a larger audience is now connected to these archives and they are making use of these archives. So my idea was to kind of come and contribute in that form. Now, how this idea started taking shape in the beginning is that I'm sure you all have kind of followed or have some familiarity with the how the farmers' protests were one of the major developments of 2020. Towards the end of year 2020, when we were all struggling with various rounds of or waves of COVID-19 spread, farmers in the northern part of the country started mobilizing themselves, and once they carried out a substantial mass campaign starting from June 2020, a larger mobilization of these protesters led to a march to Delhi. And that was in November, and November, to be specific, November 25th to 27th. 26th and 27th was the call to go to Delhi and kind of express their grievances. Now, given that I come from the state of Haryana and I belong to a farming family, and my family is into agriculture, and we are small and marginal farming background, it was something which was unfolding right in front of my eyes. And like, as we kind of have become maybe more familiar, like, okay, like, protesters, they do it for a few days and then it withers away and they don't kind of sustain. So this was something which changed in the coming months, and I started following it more closely. But when you are there in that environment, you don't necessarily document it. You live it. You also kind of see it, how the people around you are maybe talking about it. So once you are in that environment, which I was, because I was, due to offline, my work was offline, so I was able to see it, observe it around that phase. So once I came back in March, came back to Pune where I work, it kind of started bothering me that I am unable to get updates and I don't know how to find out, because that is also the time when the movement was getting more intense and more widespread. So I could see that there are a lot of conflicting narratives about the movement. There are a lot of uh, different kind of interest working within the movement, because there are khap panchayats which are involved, there are farmers unions which are involved, there are women's organizations which are involved, which are not necessarily on the same page on all issues. So this also kind of gave me the more reason to start looking at it more closely and start following the updates more closely, because that is when you can start in a way analyzing the movement academically. And given my interest in the agrarian relation and rural relation society field, I thought if we have to make a sense of one of these, the longest and the one of the longest movements in the recent history of our country, there has to be a more regular update on how it is unfolding. So that was the primary objective, which made me follow it more closely, and to kind of understand what is the progression, what is the nature and character of this movement in its making, and also to kind of contribute towards the scholarship on the agrarian issues which were centric to this movement. Now, in terms of methodology, once I came back in March 2021, by the time the movement was already 3 to 4 months old, the first piece which I wrote on my observations of the organization part of the movement was sometime in mid-December. I went for a day towards the borders. The Tikri border is the closest one to my place, and I went for a day and I just walked around. In the evening, I came back and I thought, okay, let me write my observations, and that is the first kind of a blog which I wrote on how people are settling in at the protest sites, which is a very unusual protest site on a highway, and one could see that kilometers and kilometers of queue of tractors and trolleys and tents, and even in the side, empty fields and spaces, people have started living, and the food is cooked collectively, langar is being served, people are, getting out their day-to-day activities as it is a normal, day for them. So then there is a huge rush of people, those who wanted to contribute in the sense of ration or dry material, etc., which were flooding the tents and the langars, and people were not able to even accommodate the kind of supplies which were sent by people, and we saw a lot of that coming back without being distributed. So I thought, like, okay, this is something massive, and it is going to kind of last than what was expected. So once I came back, the location made me more worried and more kind of anxious about how do I now know about this movement, because once you are there, you are absorbing the environment around it. But once I came back to Pune, I kind of felt more anxious and restless to get updates. This made me scroll through social media news related to farmers' movement. And once I started looking at it, there were also more intense protest actions taking place in the state of Haryana, particularly. April onwards, there were sustained conflicts with the state, which the farmers were getting involved into, and these would last for days. Like, people gather at one location if something major has happened, and they will clear out those administrative buildings and other buildings of the state, and they will just sit there for days regarding the immediate solution to their demands. either it was the arrest of farmers or filing cases against farmers, etc. So these events were also very different in nature. So this could also lead to a significant confrontation between, and it did lead to a large amount of conflict between the farmers and the law and order agencies. So I started then following certain Facebook pages, YouTube channels, because around that time there was a huge surge in Facebook pages publicizing the developments around the farmers movement. There were a lot of channels which had come about. There were a lot of YouTube platform channels which were kind of giving live updates from the borders and also from the more remote protest locations across India. So thanks to this kind of AI and algorithm mechanisms, where once you start consuming a particular kind of content, the social media keeps showing you the similar kind of content, and it became a kind of snowballing that from one news you jump onto the other news, and then you read more about it. Then that news leads you to another piece of information. So slowly then I started getting a better understanding of what was happening, and I also started writing it for my own documentation, that okay, if we have to kind of look at the different facets of this movement, then what would be the large domains which will emerge from it. It is the nature of people's participation, it is the solidarities which it is building, whether it is the geographical coverage which it is gaining day by day, or it is the nature of the demands of the protesters which is getting now more diversified. So to make a better understanding of all these aspects, I started documenting it. But the more in a way, and then a lot of unions were also publicizing their activities or their protest calls through the social media platforms. So once they have put out something, I might have followed almost around 50 to 60 new pages or individuals on social media which were kind of involved and reporting. So that range gave me an idea of okay, what is happening on day-to-day basis. Now what in a way I'll come to the archive overview in some time. Let me just quickly give you a timeline and how it was executed. First, the more structured and organized form of documentation started happening in April 2021. This continued till the movement lasted, which was December 2021, and movement was kind of the main demand of the farmers were met somewhere around November 19th November, or if I'm right. And then farmers took another month or so to kind of negotiate and formalize the final negotiations with the government, and to work out the formalities in terms of how to now proceed further. But then I thought of okay, like December 31st is end of the year. This can be taken up to that date, and it will cover a full year in that sense. So this was somewhere when it started in April 2021, my documentation took more organized and structured form. Around August 2021, I was meeting a few friends, and I told them that this is something which I am doing, and they suggested this is useful documentation, but I mean my interest was primarily to keep it to myself. I wasn't thinking about making it a public repository. But thanks to my friends I met, so they suggested that okay, since you are doing this this work, why can't it be available in public domain? And that is when also the name also kind of clicked, that okay, it can be a people's archive of farmers protest, because it documents how people participated in and how people lived, and how people experienced this movement, and it should be for them. So that gave this project a more concrete shape and a direction. And then once I also became kind of familiar with the process of documenting it, each day it will take a couple of hours for me to go through the social media pages and handles and channels, etc., and see, okay, why what has happened today. And some of it is also, of course, reported in the media, but media reports it, the digital media reports it on the very movement, but on print media it comes a day after the incident has happened. So I relied mostly on the digital mediums, and that was then and also some of the months were really busy in the sense that they were really intense. Like every day there was a large and wide list, type of events which were taking place. So this got more structured and more organized in the methods and process. Then in once the movement got in a way, it was paused and it was kind of agreed on the demands, and the farmers then went home after dismantling all their protest infrastructure at the borders and various other protest sites across the country. I then started, with the assistance of one of my students, I started kind of working on editing the entries which I had documented, because when the immediate documentation was more of a rough form. And in January 2022, I remember the first email which I exchanged with one of my students is on 15th January, and from 18th January onwards we got on to editing and formatting and finalizing the entries. So what I would do, each week I will send my students, like those who were volunteering with me on this project from January 22 onwards, I will send them weekly list of few entries, say like a page or something, and they will during the week they will work on editing it. And we started making a Google Doc master file of all these entries. So once we started this process, I kind of looked at the length of this material, and roughly, if I remember it correctly, I had some 60 pages, word pages of that file, which had covered this 16 months of the movement. And in January 22 also, then simultaneously we registered the domain, web domain, pafp.in, and May 22 onwards, we kind of started the website and finalizing the purchase of the template and the designing, etc. And starting from July, August onwards, we uploaded these entries, which were finalizing on weekly basis onto the main website of the archive. And mid-December last year, which is around 1.5 months ago, this archive was launched. So this is the overall timeline and the execution part of it. Now, if I can take you to show you what the main aspects of this website covers, then we can all have a look at it. So this is the landing page of our website, which has a few sliders, making people in a way familiar with the important part which they go to. And then if they are kind of not scanning the browsing the entire website. So landing page about archive, what this archive is all about, why this archive is important, and the ideas behind it. And it also includes the methodology which I discussed with you. Then it has a section of the new farm laws, which is gives a brief idea about what a brief analysis of what these three laws were. And then it talks about beginning of the anti-farm law protest. This is more of a descriptive kind of section, which gives a background of how the protests started. And these are the artwork by Banjan Roy, who's a sketch artist, and this is more of a descriptive details of how the farmers' protest began and what were the initial developments which were happening. So this starts, as I mentioned, from June 2020 onwards, as soon as the laws were passed by the cabinet as ordinances. And this shows some bit of background work which the farmers unions were doing, and who all were coming back. This artwork has been kind of made available to us by David Roy, who's an artist and who also stayed at the border protest sites for a long time, and he was kind of making sketches of the day-to-day activities and the regular life of the protesters. So he was kind enough to kind of allow us to use this work. So now this is one of the pages. Now then we have, before I come to the data which was documented, this is the history and background. The larger agrarian crisis and the crisis of farmers' incomes and indebtedness and the suicides, which a lot of people have been talking about over the last few decades. So all that worked in the background of this, in a way, more boiling of the ultimate protests. And this is something which gave it a background. So now I would like you to see the timing page, which is the documentation which was taking place on day-to-day basis. So the timeline is a month-wise detail of protest actions, events, and mobilizations which were taking place. So this is the primary focus of the archive project, that it documented the protest actions and the events as they took place. And it starts the more formal documentation of the event starts from September 2020, and it gives on each day what was happening. It gives an idea of, for example, if you look at the first entry, it has September 8th through 13th in Punjab Jail Bharo Andolan. So it gives a tag of the nature of the protest action and the location. Deeply Kurukshetra, Haryana, first case of police brutality, that was September 10th. Then September 17th, controversial bills passed in Lok Sabha. That is also Shiromani Akali Dal Minister Harsimrat Kaur resigned from the cabinet. September 19th, similarly, a major event and a decisive movement in the struggle was the coming together of the 30+ farmer organizations of Punjab. They met in Moga and they decided to have a joint movement. So this exercise kind of documents. Then we come to October. Again, what were the major events of this month? November. So as we go down, there are more details on how the movement was taking shape, how it was progressing, and which reasons were of organizing what activities. If we want to look at more details, because these are just the taglines here to give a brief idea about what this particular event was, we can go to the end of the month page and click on, for example, you want to read more details about the January, but I'll come to that in a bit. I'll just take you through. Is it working? Are you able to see it properly as I scroll it down?
Yes, we are in sync with you.
Okay, so as we go down, it has data on these. This is the form in which the data has been recorded. So for example, if there were more than one activity on a particular date, here August 23rd, you have also a call given by the Sanyukt Kisan Morcha, which was the overall central body of or a collective of the farmers organizations which were leading and were the main leading platform for the movement. So then Tirupur in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, where there were different protest actions. In Hisar, Haryana, there was another farmer protest. In Jind, Haryana, there was again a protest on the same day. So if there were multiple events and protest actions on a particular date, these are documented under this format. This goes on till, as I mentioned, till December. So the last few months were really busy, and there were a lot of actions which were taking place. So these entries during these months are longer. So now we have this December, which is the end of the documentation. So here 31st December is the last entry. Now what I was trying to suggest to you, if somebody is interested in reading in more detail, they can click here and it will lead them to the month-wise archive, which is a more detailed description with some news item also tagged on that particular event. So if there was a news report, that link is also inserted here. If we go back, we click on this, it gives us more details about that particular event other than just reading the tagline. So these are two forms or formats in which the daily events and protest actions and mobilizations of the farm movement are organized. Coming back to the home page again. It's the victory, how the farmers celebrated their victory, and how the acceptance of their demands was also reported, and how farmers reacted to that victory. So this is something what the archive documents, and I'll show you the team right here before I then move to my presentation. This is the team which worked on this archive. My students were the major contributors in editing and populating the entries on the website. And Azra Siddiqui, who was the web developer, great support in terms of giving us ideas on the template, on the design, on its structure, etc. So the presentation and various other contributions have come from Azra, who is a freelance web developer and has been a tremendous support in terms of giving us inputs in terms of what works for websites, online websites. So I'll come back to now my just maybe two more slides which are left, and then conclude. So this is the brief overview of the archive which I gave. Now, in terms of coverage, which we analyzed our data, we did preliminary analysis to understand what all locations our documentation covers, and now we have approximately 600 entries, which represent almost 16 months duration of the movement, starting from September 2020 till December 2021. So these are 16 months, and we have documented around 600 entries, which are spread across 65 cities and towns. There was also a kind of belief that this movement is mostly in the parts of Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, these northern states which are, participating in it. But we have, now this statistics in front of us, which shows that we have covered almost 29 states which participated in some form or the other. There are also 8 countries other than India which were also kind of contributing and carrying out solidarity actions in support of the farmers' demands. These were New Zealand, Australia, Canada, where there is significant, Sikh or Punjab diaspora. So this is the more or less coverage of the movement. Now, in terms of academic output, the documentation and archiving this project has led to bring out certain analytical and pieces and academic contributions from us. As I mentioned, the movement was also supported by various CAPs in Haryana. So there is a paper which came out in Sociological Bulletin, a special issue on farmers' movement, which talks about how CAPs were participating and what was the impact of their participation in the movement. Then there is an organizational aspect of it, which has been covered in the other article. Then along with one of the leading women activists, Jagmati Sangwan, we also wrote a paper on women's participation in the movement, which came out in PW. And currently, I'm working with one of my colleagues, Professor Sabah Siddiqui, who teaches psychology at Kriya University, on an edited volume on tentatively titled as People's History of the Farmers' Movement, which is an anthology of putting together different narratives and different papers from different sides of the protest. It involves papers on music, on langar, on how unions participated in, etc., how it unfolded in Maharashtra, in Rajasthan, in Western Uttar Pradesh, what were the meaning of this movement. So this is something which we have been able to produce so far, and we continue to also work with on archive. We have 2 major now plans to carry forward with. One is that creating a repository of the intellectual resources, that there's a huge amount of literature which has been produced by different contributors over the last 2 years, and we want to kind of make it available on our website as an intellectual resource repository where people can come and go through this very wide range of articles, opinion pieces, etc. We also want to kind of document the audio-visual material, which is in the form of images, pictures, and small videos. Maybe we'll be able to source these from different people. And the second, or the second most important part is to also kind of make it more inclusive and thick. Given the limitations in following the updates from social media, it has a limitation in the sense that what all can be followed on regular basis, and the reports, many places are unable to report it in the social media platforms also. So eventually maybe to visit different states, etc., meet people and take their record with their consent and put it in terms of anonymous form in the movements to make it more inclusive, more representative, and more maybe thick. Just the last bit. I know I'm exceeding my time, but in terms of challenges, I think like this is something which we also talked about in the Mealy session with the Ishita and the others. That how I feel personally in terms of some of the limitations of this platform or this project is that in its form it remains still a restricted resource because of language, because of a lot of people not being aware of the platform and maybe unable to use it. So making it more accessible to the masses, to the people, is a challenge, and we need to think about how to maybe overcome this. There is also a challenge of continuity and sustainability, that to what extent this can be sustained, and will it also become one of those platforms where maybe once the movement is subsided, people will move on and not maybe kind of sustain the updates on this platform or elsewhere. And it's not being available in the physical space is also a restriction, in the sense that its reach is again restricted with it being hosted on the digital, even though we have substantial now internet users and smartphone users. A physical space is something which is different and maybe more situated to among people. So this is something which I want to kind of highlight and share with you all. Sorry for exceeding a few minutes. I hope if there are any questions and comments, we can take them. So thank you.
That's completely all right. I think it was a very thorough process. Sorry, my video is acting up. It was quite a thorough narration that you had prepared for us. So this time was due expected. Thank you so much for taking us through both the timeline and the genesis of the project. Because I think some of these archiving projects would be difficult to understand at its face value if one doesn't understand what has gone behind it and why it emerged. I think then it becomes easier to pull out critical questions or criticism sometimes, but not realizing that what it takes to actually build them. So that's my appreciation for what you have been able to put together, and that too in such a short time. I have my questions, but I'm going to hold them and leave the floor open to the participants first. And I hope, Shristi, the format is fine. We could first discuss this project and then move on to your presentation and speak with you, because I think these two will be very different spaces.
Yes, I don't have any issue. That's fine.
Great. Okay, so yes, whoever has questions wants to go first.
Can I, Ishita?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to, you did mention that you want to make it more accessible to people because you feel that this is limited in terms of who can, because of the language and everything. But do you feel the need for the core subjects, as in people who are directly first impacted, which is the farmers and the people around them, to be directly connected to your archive in some way?
Well, I think, yes, I haven't actually did a lot of thinking on this, but one way of bringing more people who actually participated in it is that, yes, they use it, they contribute, because that is actual then contribution directly from the people and the people who participated in it. So if they have documents, they have records, nothing like that, if they kind of allow us to make use of those resources and participate in it, become part of our team, and also use it for maybe making sense of, okay, this is what, because even their reference points maybe are limited to their regions and to their localities. But once we see that, okay, this was happening in Chennai also, this was happening in Vellore also, this was happening in Palakkad also, this was happening in Odisha. So they all come together and make a maybe more holistic sense of the spread and the geographical coverage of this movement. So that is also something I'm going to work towards during this summer, maybe, that how to maybe visit different places and get people and also to get people know about this platform, and also maybe request them to contribute on whatever information they have. So that is, yes, one way of involving more people.
So one of the questions, I'm just presuming that this would also apply to her project, is the question about ethics. At what stages did you need to address them, from using social media content to how you might have presented the primary voices and the sources? So how have you continuously resolved questions about ethics and the legality behind projecting people's voices?
Yeah. So one is that I mean that's a very important aspect of this entire documentation, that since the movement, since the documentation, so one of the ethics concern is that, is this particular exercise putting people at risk, people putting the community or the protesters at risk? Then no, because the documentation totally relies on the details which are already in the public domain. So it's not naming anybody, it's not naming even the unions or the individuals in whatever way. Even the sources are anonymized. So whatever is there in the public domain appears here as a consolidated documentation. So those details are already in the public domain available. And this before starting this project, I also, before making it a website available in the public domain, I also kind of did the IRB, the Institutional Review Board clearance, on discussing the methods and the processes which are followed in this, and it has been approved with no risk, having no potential of putting anybody at risk. So that is something which I have kind of taken care. In terms of presenting a community, given that I myself belong to a farming community and the rural background, it makes me also think about in a way how I will also involve and my larger community's voice in this through this platform. And it's not kind of putting them in some sort of isolated stakeholders or actors, but the main center of this, even without naming or identifying them.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting if the archive also has a page dedicated to people of the archiving project and what their experiences were. So not somebody, maybe let's say, who is just developing the website, but somebody who's been on the ground and what it felt like, almost like a debriefing note. Because for, at least I'm thinking aloud, because that's what makes these archiving projects different from, let's say, building an architect's archive or a collection of regional histories from Hampi. Even when we did Hampi, we had actually asked the students to make their own personal journal, so that can, if needed, can become a part of the archive. So I think that the experience is so rich and politically thriving. I don't know, in years later, when somebody wants to research this, they might really want to know, where did you stand and how did you look at what you looked at?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and it can be like, I think explode that how to maybe bring the stories of the organizers, but that again has an ethical dimension, that to what extent we can make their identities, make their visibility like in the public.
Yes, of course, with consent and all of that, but at least
no, I think that is actually one of the things which in the beginning had come to my mind, and thanks for making it again, reminding me of this again, that we should go and maybe conduct interviews and take their detailed experience by through case studies or something and put them here.
Okay, Aparna, over to you.
Yeah, hi Shamsher. Thank you for that presentation. I just wanted to check, since the farmers' protest is the subject matter of legislation. It's also controversial. It's political. What were some of the doubts that may have run through your mind when you wanted to put something like this out in a public space? And also, is it possible to put it out objectively, or the fact that you have chosen this subject matter itself means that you're taking a particular stand, which may not necessarily align with the narratives of people in power, for example. So sometimes our archives do sort of tread that fine balance.
Yeah.
So did you have any doubts about that when you set out to do it? And yeah.
No, thanks actually, Aparna, for asking this. And doubts, yes, doubts were about in particularly Haryana, there were certain incidents which were kind of really, really tensed, and it could have like gone here or there, like during those really, really tensed mobilization. Sorry. Which Haryana is known for those kind of incidents in the past also, that the people's mobilization can, during Jat reservation agitation, during other kinds of mobilizations, there is a kind of history in the state of Haryana that protests do get out of hand sometimes, but this was such a I think well led, well directed, well disciplined movement that those apprehensions were there initially, and those were my doubts also, that if people kind of break certain lines and they push the boundaries, it may lead to the entire collapse of the movement. But I think they also became very evident of the fact that there's a lot at stake here. So if they get misguided or misled, it could kind of dismantle the entire momentum. So my doubts were more of this nature. I have tried to remain objective as a researcher in the sense what I have written.
Yeah.
My papers have also kind of pointed out the fault lines, the problems, the limitations, and maybe some of the negative developments. Our paper on women's participation is acknowledges that yes, this was the participation of women, the well celebrated women's participation in this movement primarily remains within the upper caste land owning women's participation. So there is a question of class. There is a question of the identity of the gender question also. My paper on Khap Panchayats documents that how Khaps also kind of tried to gain more stronghold into their losing territory over the last few decades. They were becoming more and more irrelevant, but by using this particular movement, they also try to enhance their control over the rural society. So these are some of the articulations which I have kind of maintained to not glorify it, not over celebrate it, but also to make certain objective observations as a researcher, which is necessary to be critical also. So there are certain critical observations which have come out in our analysis and in our papers. But in terms of making a choice for documenting it, yes, it stems from the initial interest in studying the agrarian society and the rural society, and a movement, agrarian mobilization are a significant point of uh, entry into also understanding how societies change, how movements play a larger role in just meeting the immediate demands for which they are organized. So the entry into this was from this interest, but it kinds of then makes itself clear that if your involvement in it is not of a fence sitter, but rather of a more involved participant in it. I hope that kind of addresses the question.
So on behalf of Aparna, I'm going to confirm that yes, it does explain the position from which you must have approached it to be able to maintain the, I would say, maintain the subjectivity. Because I think in a project like this, it would not be possible to be, I don't know if you disagree, but 100% objective. So be right to say that you maintain your subjectivity, you keep that under restraint. And as you rightly said, you find areas where you can write about it, project it, whereas the archive tries to remain as neutral as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good way of putting it.
Playing different roles, right? You are the researcher on field. You are also curating the archive. Then you're back writing papers as an academician.
Yeah.
So this multiple roles that we all have been talking about through different projects, even in this group, become very critical to sort of balance this question about subjectivity and objectivity.
I think that's a very interesting point, which I am thinking maybe differently for the first time. That okay, while doing all these tasks and also maybe participating in different formats, how I would have channeled myself through. So maybe I need to give it a more thought. But yeah, to the broader concerns, yes, like I think. I think this is what it is.
I'm actually analyzing that if one is a researcher, subjectivity 80%, objectivity 20%. Then when you're an archivist, your ratio changes, objectivity 80% or 70%. I'm literally talking numbers here that it might be happening very subconsciously, but could this be the way we are operating, especially when we're thinking of personally built archiving projects?
Yeah.
Which means that you are investing energy not just to research and get your paper out, which could be 100% subjective in a way, or not subjective, but at least subjective in its interest.
Yes.
Whereas the whole fact that we want to build an archive, we are trying to say that we step out and make this content more available, accessible. Because even within the school of researchers, I think this is becoming a much bigger shift. From what I've seen, my teachers and mentors and those times look at what is research and versus what we are seeing as research now. Because it seems that they all had dearths of information, but it was always locked away, lost on hard drives.
Yeah.
There was never, I don't think there was a concept of wanting to make it accessible.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a fear also.
It gives you power. It gives you power
Yes.
to hold on to information and behave like
Yes.
Uh,
You are the god.
and,
Yeah. So one is power, and I also want to give them a benefit of doubt that there was fear also. Because you didn't know if that methodology was fine. You were not subject to critique. So you were not sure if somebody read your way of doing a certain drawing or an interview, how will they read it? Whereas currently things are a little different in terms of academia and research. That yes, I did it like this, I am putting it out, but here is the material. You can read it completely differently.
Totally.
And that doesn't still invalidate my work.
Yes, exactly. Actually, yeah. I think thanks for saying that. Actually, that even with the writings you are doing, it puts you in a vulnerable position of people criticizing it, disagreeing with it, which is fine. But at the same time, it should be left to those who are doing it. Like both parties should let it. Yeah, I mean, I think thanks for saying it. Yeah.
Over to Shristi.
I don't have a question as such, but I had come across this really interesting archive. It's called Kashmir Photo Collective.
Right.
And I really liked the approach they had taken to archive the things, because the kind of, like, they archive the family photos of people who live in Kashmir.
Mm,
So
mm,
the kind of consent and all of this comes, and like the conversations happen on another level. So I had attended this talk at Conflictorium. So we could not archive that conversation because the consent was at play. Like, you know, like Alisha said, who was part of the Kashmir Photo Collective, she had initially told that, whoever is in this room, you can see and like understand what this conversation is about, but you cannot record this or like, tell more about this, because these are personal stories, right? Like someone's family photo is being shown to you, so you can't
mm,
really
mm.
take a picture of it
Yeah,
without them
yeah,
knowing.
yeah.
So it was just an interesting way for me to understand that, you can archive such things as well, but the how much amount of that you want to make it public depends on like how you can do it. I don't think the archive is live now, because I don't think they present all this information over
Yeah,
there.
that's why I just shared the hashtag, because they
Mm,
have
Yeah, yeah,
spoken at different forums, and whatever
yeah,
is allowed is shared on Facebook. Yeah. So that's why
yeah,
I just shared the hashtag.
yeah. But it was interesting to just see, like, you can archive and make things accessible, but the accessibility bit depends on how much you can share, like,
Right.
so
mm.
it shouldn't be limiting you on how much you can archive.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the dissemination can depend on
Mm,
like how much can be shared and how much cannot be shared, but the importance of archiving becomes very
yeah,
different at that point.
true.
Yeah, you're right. So what you are suggesting over here is that archive building is not only if you're allowed to
Yeah.
share and publicly
Mm,
project something. The interest of archiving is to preserve histories,
Yes,
not
because it's
necessarily
a very
always.
powerful position.
yeah.
So
I also like came across something about photography recently. I read like what is a photograph, or what is photography? Photography is capturing a movement which is forever gone.
That's
So
right. Yes.
I mean, there's no other way of now going back to that movement and experiencing it other than photographing it. So I
True.
think archives in that sense are capturing the movements which are forever gone,
Mm.
uh, but with like various shades of it and various.
In fact, now that we are back to ethics, so the question I had asked was very similar to what Shristi pointed out. That when you were interviewing them, and I completely understand that you were in a live space, and there was perhaps no room for paperwork, or even sometimes maybe noting down the contact details of certain people and being able to reach back to them. So in that kind of a situation, when we represent their voices, or rather in this case present their voices through a platform, is this something that they were made aware of?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if making a website was really a part of your plan. At least that's not what it came
Yeah.
across in the timeline.
Actually, this timeline or this archive doesn't involve any interviewing actually at all. It is
Okay.
totally
So it
sourced
is
from
all
the information
secondary
which is
source.
already available in the public domain.
Okay.
So no interviewing allowed. Interviews were conducted for writing the papers, which I got ethical clearances separately, because I
Right.
interviewed Khap Panchayat leaders, I interviewed farmers protesters, the union leaders, various other stakeholders, like people those who were part of the grassroots organization. So clearances were sought, ethical clearances were sought differently for different papers, like for more detailed like institutional review board, through which we have to explain our methods, our representation, our recruitment of our subjects, participants, everything had to go through scrutiny and this kind of review. So for archive, the methods were very simple, that whatever is there in the digital platform already in anonymized form is here. So no interviews conducted so far for the archive.
Okay. But would you then eventually want to put these interviews on the archive?
These are already documented and have been shown used in the papers. So people who with proper consent, and if they have said they don't want to be named, etc., their anonymity has, their privacy has been respected, and that is some bit of it is already there in the different write-ups. But if we come to carry out maybe in the future more case studies for the website and for the archive, that will require us to go back to the ethical clearances and other clearances. If we do it in the future, that is still there. We are going to make sure that it goes through proper ethical clearances. But from the earlier recording, earlier interviews, whatever we have used, it's been used in the academic papers, but we are not going to put them out here separately.
Okay, that explains again that within consent as well, you can have different roles and outputs for the data as well.
And we told them that
Because
this is for a research paper on this subject. So we are going to talk to you about on this matter alone.
Nice, right. Yeah, that distinction really helps. That's good. I mean, of course, on the other end, when what we are trying to do with most of our research or interviews particularly, I think, is to tell them why we are here. So the immediate agenda. But on that recording as well, we do inform them that because we work in this area, we are seeing that information and projects are becoming other things eventually, and giving them a sense that all of this work is also so living. So we might use it to present to somebody, or we might use it, of course, to write a paper, but build archival projects or make it a part of a different kind of an archiving exercise. So we try and explain. Of course, we haven't really found terminologies for a lot of this in vernacular, which is a very, very difficult space to be in. But we try, we show them samples of what we are doing for them to know कि इसमें से और कुछ भी हो सकता है. And of course, hopefully, whenever it happens, we'll show it to them also, kind of a thing. So try and stay in touch. But that staying in touch always doesn't fall through because their numbers change, or the family member who was in touch passes away, and things like that also happen. So we try and safeguard ourselves with a long-term assurance of कि आपके पास से जो ले रहे हैं, we want to produce it in more forms of knowledge. And hopefully they will be okay with it. But I don't know how fair that is also to them.
True.
So yeah, that's where the question was coming from. Okay, anyone else? Any questions, thoughts? I'm sure by the time we listen to Shristi, more things will brew.
Sure.
So we could.
So
sorry, Shamsher.
No. I mean, that's it. I think now.
I think it will brew, and we'll connect dots as well, because Shristi might show us now a variety of things, and we might just connect it back to the kind of project you have also curated and developed. So I'm sure there'll be more.
I'm really looking forward to Srishti's talk as well. As I was telling Ishita that I've already put her Pasina, that exhibition, as one of my teaching resources, which I'm going to use in one of my courses, which I'm currently teaching, and I'm really looking forward to it.
That.
Yeah, I told Ishita the other day that I have already made a note of that Pasina exhibition for one of my courses on social stratification. So I'm going to discuss class through your, material.
Glad to hear that. I'm happy that it's being used in a lot of other places. I wasn't aware of this, but it's nice to hear it.
And we are on Facebook, PFP India as our page. We are on Instagram as PFP India. So you'll be able to find us there also. Please, follow us there, and also use the website, circulate it, send it to your friends, your colleagues, and we look forward to your engagement. So
thank you so much, and I hope that this project grows out of bounds at a point, and we have a lot more. I think what you last said, the geographical coverage. So farmers also know the fight was, or the experiences are sort of geographical. Yeah. Very nice. And also we'll look forward to seeing more languages come in, which I think so that's something I didn't want to put it up, but more languages coming in will also make it much richer.
Sure.
All right, thank you all for keeping to the time. It's just that it's Sunday and I'm very conscious of not taking more of your time, as much as we all enjoy these conversations. Right. So over to introducing Shristi. We have known each other for now 3 years. So very early on, Shrishti connected with us. I didn't even know, to be very honest. She had attended one of the first forums that we did as Curating for Culture. We had called it Curating Archives, and she had been a part of it. And then in no time, we found each other working together on different kinds of archiving projects. And definitely a need that this team needs at Curating for Culture. Because as I said yesterday, web development and tech is not my thing at all. And Shishti has been kind enough to even guide us into the project, what we will need, what kind of team and support. And then she brings them on board. So that's Shishti. We have done architectural archiving mostly together, whether it was for Biome or whether it was for Women Architects project, which she will talk to us more about. And I've been always fascinated by the other works that she's been doing, which I've not had an insight into. So it's new, fresh for me to listen to her today. Formally introducing Shishti, she's an experienced designer and she practices at the intersection of design, culture, and engagement, which explains the kind of the body of work that she's built. Interested in creating meaningful experiences across digital and physical spaces. She tries to create archival and museum spaces accessible. She has been working with various kinds of museums and archives, looking at structures of power, access, and organization. Um, so it ranges from Conflictorium Archives, Biome Archives, Women of Vastukala Project, as well as Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaja's Vastu Sangralaya in Mumbai. She's also interested in gender politics and works around documenting cityscapes through her lens. So that's Shishti for us. And again, I asked her, she said yes. So these have been very heartwarming moments when we don't have to much look for the right presenters and speakers for the workshops. Thank you, Shishti, so much for making time and sharing your work with us.
Thank you, Chita. It's been great working with you as well. Like, I've learned a lot about archives over 3 years, so that's good. One second, let me just. I'll just share my screen, and um, so I can tell a little bit about myself and what we might be looking at in this presentation before we get into it. Um, I studied exhibition design at NID, so my original study is on spaces and how spaces need to be experienced. But over the time, I have also, like, that learning also translates into the digital spaces. So I always look at any digital experience or physical experience through the point of how I, as an audience, might be experiencing it. So, be it archives or museums, they need to be focused for person who's actually entering and visiting that space, right? Whether it's digitally or physically. I will walk you all through how I went about the Conflictorium Archives and Women of Vastukala, because both of these I had a very different position of working. With Women of Vastukala, Ishita was the one who was like archiving the whole project, and I came in to help her with the design and development bit. And with Conflictorium Archives, I was like the first person to like start the whole archiving process in the institution. There were certain things which were already happening, but I had to do it from the archiving, designing, development, everything. So just drawing parallels on where you situate at different projects. These are institutional archives, but they're slightly different in terms of, like, if you look at like conventional bigger institutions archives. So let's get started. This is just my understanding of what I understand of archiving and like how I imagine it in simpler terms. A lot of terms might not be not the correct terms maybe, but this is just my interpretation of things. So I look at it from archiving, design, developing, and maintaining point of view, because once you establish your archive, that's when the real work starts. I feel like you need to maintain it over time and keep it relevant for the right number of years, I think. So it can never be a linear process. You always have to keep coming back to things, and like it can you'll have to keep coming back to your archives and see what things can be developed. So accessibility can also come at different levels. Like initially you might want to start at a wherever you can start, but you can 2 years down the line, you can come back to it and make it more accessible. So that's something which is always there. In terms of scale, a lot of times, like if you're working on personal archives, you might be able to do everything together, depending on what scale you're working on in terms of the project. So a lot of times these roles like mix, and like one person is able to do things. You can wear multiple hats and like figure out what you want to do. So depending on the people, like it changes. So within each of these domain, I'll talk mostly about like design and like developing and how they go hand in hand with archiving and maintaining the archive. um, like from conceptualizing the archive, you build the archiving framework, you have your database, everything is ready. How do you start presenting that to, like, how you start making that accessible to the audience? When I say audience, it can also be you as an audience, right? Like if you're making your own personal archive, your family can also be your audience. So being mindful of that as well. um, just keeping all of those things in mind. These, like when I'm writing over here development, this is more of like coding bit. So for example, yesterday when when you saw Lekha, that is a place where you don't have to do the development because it's already been done. So it's more easy for you to just create that archive. But this is more in terms of if you are getting somebody who's gonna develop the archive for you, or like if you are planning to do it yourself as well. Um, Again, so the moment the audience, like we have to be mindful of like who is this person who's accessing this archive. If it's a researcher, if it's my granddaughter, if it's anybody who's accessing that archive, how accessible it can be. It can be at multiple levels, like across devices is one of the things. For example, like on, you might be accessing this archive on your phone, somebody might be accessing this archive on desktop. So that device accessibility, then accessibility in terms of like digital and physical spaces. So how we just heard, like if we had a physical archive, we think it might be more uh, accessible. So those kind of accessibility also come into picture. Linguistic is something which is also there. What about people who can't read altogether? So those kind of accessibilities also come into picture. Linguistic accessibility for web also has like standards of how a website needs to be created so that it's also accessible for people who have visual impairments. So all of those things also come into picture. Outreach access, what I mean by this is that, for example, if I have built my archive, it's there, it's available online. How does it reach to the right audience? Like, how does it reach to the audience? Like, just because it's available and live, that does not mean your audience will be able to access it if it's across domains. Like, so that is also a key essential point of when you're thinking about developing the archive. Again, the communication bit is very important because like design, archive, development, all of these are very skilled, like skill sets, like, and the kind of communication you need to have, like the kind of terms people use for development, the kind of terms people use for designing, the kind of terms people use for archiving, they're very different from each other. Like a lot of times there can be a lot of communication might be lost, so it needs to be very thorough in terms of what you are trying to achieve with respect to personal or physical archives, and like institutional archives as well. I also want to show you all some of the archive visualizations which might be beyond like what we usually imagine. So just to show what all can be done. Obviously, like this requires a different kind of skill set and all, but just to be able to see all of this, it makes, like you are able to understand what kind of possibilities can be there in the web. uh, my internet might have some issues. Let me just load all of this. So these are few experiments which Google does to just expand the possibilities of what data visualization or archives can be like. Definitely the development of this has a different scale, but it's nice to have this in mind when you're thinking of what you might want to use for your archive and like for your interactions. So this is called Curator's Table, I think, and it's a visual archive, but in an experiment where you see all the artists, all the photographs, all the artworks in one place. So let me just see if it's loading. Again, so like these are usually made on different kind of platforms, so not the usual way of coding. It might take some time to load. Yeah, it's going to be slow. But the dots over here are actually individual artworks, so it sort of expands and shows you the kind of artworks you can have. In terms of visual analysis, it's great because a lot of information you also want to just see visually, not with text. So it works really well in that sense.
I think the slow loading is also exciting in its own ways.
Yeah, I shared these links on chat if anybody wants.
I was just going to say that if you want to not bother with the loading and buffering, you can put all the links in the chat.
But I think it will also take time in your devices because these are like heavy sites in general.
Yes, yes, of course, yes.
I'll definitely share the links with you all.
Either ways, we can share it with the larger group also. Those who had to, one or two people had medical reasons to miss the session.
Okay.
So at least we can share it with them. Yeah.
So that like in the beginning, you saw the amount of artworks which are there, and then these are individual artworks which are still taking time to load. Okay. And you can zoom in and zoom out to see what individual artworks are like. Yeah, as the image on the right can be seen now. Yeah, so this is the one. Actually, I've just put it all together over here as well. So you have different options, like if you can see below, like you can visually align them in with respect to a timeline. Like if you want to see the artworks basis what time they were made, you can also see the artworks basis the kind of color palette they have used, and you can also see the like artworks basis the artist. So these are the three kind of categorizations this website uses. So yeah, so like this is the information which is provided for each image. If I click on this, then I get more information about this image over here. So this is one. I'll share the links with you all so that you can see it properly. There is another one which I wanted to show you all, which is this, which is more like a visualization of history in a timeline way only, but it's more visual in terms of making connections of different point of histories. So if I want to know more information about this one thread of the history, I get like the audio, where it is from, what kind of objects are related to this. But you can move forward and back in the timeline and see where it is taking you. And each color denotes like different kind of region, like Asia, Europe, America, Africa, Oceania. So it's interesting to just see that all of these things are possible on the web, and then you can think of like what you want to achieve basis your things. So yeah, these were like two examples which I really wanted to share, and I'll just close these because they'll take a lot of time to load. Yeah, this is the third one, which also has like again like artworks, but not listed in a conventional form, so that you can see it and explore it in your own ways. This is this one. So you have like a way of seeing these, and like there is information about each artwork, but you can also visualize this across digital space, like proper virtual space. Yeah, let me just close this. After this, I can start with the project, like the first work which I want to share with you all. This is Conflictorium Archives, and then I'll also show you Biome Archives, not Biome, Women of Vastukala. So I want to show the websites first and then talk about how the approach is. So I'll just share. Um, yeah. This is what Conflictorium Archives looks like. If I select the archives, you have two doors where you can enter from. So this is also inspired from the physical space of the museum. It's a museum in Ahmedabad. So if you go to the door on the right, you have the permanent exhibits. If you take the door on the left, you actually see the more, momentarily temporary exhibits. So they hold exhibitions, performances, talks uh, upstairs in these rooms. So this is like translated from the physical space itself. These are the events they do. Like there are exhibitions, their basis on the, like Ambedkarite movements. There are performances which happen. There are poetry recitals which happen. There are workshops with the kids in the neighborhood. So a lot of variety in terms of the kind of work they do. The idea of this archive was also for the audience to experience what it might feel like being at the museum, not to just present the information. So it is, the navigation of this website is quite unconventional in that sense, but it is intentional. It's been made in that way. Uh, Again, like this was one of the first projects I had done. So I, like, now that I look at this 2 years back, I know what flaws are there, and we are actually revisiting this to make those upgrades. So for example, in terms of accessibility, this is not yet mobile responsive. So we'll be working on this now, revisiting the archives 2 years later. Um, I can just go back to one of the events, and like you can click on each of these events and see what the event was about. There is a bit of information about what this performance was about. The kind of documentation we have for each of these events is very different because they vary across mediums. A lot of these are performatives, but how do you document the moment? Like a lot of conversations at the museum were really important, but uh, there were a lot of personal conversations also. So you can't really document those conversations without asking people's consent. And at certain positions, you would even not want to ask them about the consent because they're talking from a very, space of like conflict or like very personal stories and narrations. So, in terms of archiving, we had tried to not include those informations because it didn't feel right to have that because um, if you are talking about your own personal history and someone is taking a camera in front of you, you would not talk the way you are talking. So that is one of the reasons why we didn't record those parts of conversation. um, Going back to explaining how this was thought, um, I was working on the archiving designing, and we had uh, a developer who had helped us with the development, and then the team at Conflictorium is maintaining the archive. When we were working with the content and the kind of workshops which happen at the Conflictorium, we divided it into the type of engagement people have. So this is more in terms of like how like as an institution, um, if this is what you want to archive, like this is your main, like a lot of museums have collections. Conflictorium's collection is the kind of events they host. So how do you archive a performance? So that was like one of the major learning for me personally as well. So I did a lot of experimentation of how we can document where the audience is not feeling uncomfortable and we still make sure the essence of the event is maintained. So whether it can be through text, sound, virtual like preservation, moving images, or stills, or you know, holding artifacts of, like, for example, like physical artifacts, which are like posters, or maybe one of the artworks can be preserved. So all of these kind of things, just to see what kind of information we can have. Photogrammetry was also one of the things we had tried at that point, like having the artworks documented in 3D spaces. So when I was thinking of archiving this, I was not like, I did not imagine how they will be used and will be accessible to the audience at that point, because like having a 3D object uh, on a live website takes a lot of technological developments, which we didn't have at that time, but we did have the skills to like archive. So we still archived at that point, and we thought that whenever the tech and everything will be ready, we'll have the we'll have the files for us to be used and like disseminated at whatever point it can be possible. So the formats were created in that way, like keeping in mind that we might be able to use these in future. This also brings back to the question of, like, we have this data, but what if we want to create a new exhibition out of this data? So you can use all of this information. So the documentation becomes very important in terms of how you preserve that information. Uh, Another simplest way of documenting was to just take photographs from a different viewpoints, so that you are able to see the whole room. Like, so this was more in the lines of documenting physical exhibitions and how can you make sure that you still capture the essence of the space. So this was one of the ways to document this. Um, Getting into how we started making sense of the information, it was like a very chaotic process, but somehow we managed to do that. I The sense of time helped, like the time and the kind of events they did. So that was two parameters from where we began and started listing down each of the events. A lot of this data was not there because the museum opened in 2013, and at that time Facebook was the most major way of communicating to the audience. So I had to do a lot of research and dig up Facebook accounts to find certain pieces, or like certain events which nobody knew, like when they happened and all of that information. So a lot of research went into that. uh, After a lot of like this, we had like a master sheet where we listed down all the events. So this kind of helped the further designing process. So whenever, like, in terms of archives, this helps a lot, because then you know what all the archives entails. So this was one of the uh, stages where we reached in terms of archiving, and then we started developing this archive. In terms of design, we want, like, I wanted to show the space, because the kind of events conservatorium holds would not be possible in if they were done in a white wall gallery. So I really wanted to show, like, how that space influences the kind of work it's producing. So these are initial sketches of what things can come. So this is like an exhibition page, which initially when I was designing it, I thought that it can be a horizontal scroll where you actually swipe through each page, because when you're going through a physical experience, your eyes move left to right, like you don't look top down. So that was one of the initial inspiration. Although the moment you reach development, you have certain limitations. So that a lot of your design changes the moment you reach development and start developing the things. So these were some initial sketches of how I was imagining the rest of the sections to be, like where the videos can play and all of that information. Um, these were some of the prototypes which were made on, like, the software which I usually prefer working with when I'm working on the design. So Adobe XD is the software where I can make a lot of prototypes. So I created these illustrations. The visual language is also very sketchy, to just have the skeleton of the space but not show too much, like. So that was the whole idea why we didn't add any color to the website altogether. It's like completely black and white. The posters of each event is like, like the iconic piece of each part of the event which they have done. So to highlight that, we didn't write any information about like what this event is. It just shows you the posters, and you can click on the poster and then it takes you to the different page. So this was the idea behind that. I also want to show a little bit of how the backend works, because it's really important in terms of when you are maintaining the archives. So this is like both the archives, Women of Vastukala and Conflictorium archives, are made on WordPress. One struggle which me and Ishita both have had with WordPress is to be able to upload bulk data, which I still have not been able to figure out. For Conflictorium archives, it works really well because their events happen on a live basis. Like, every month they'll have 2 or 3 events and they can upload those events. So they already have somebody who can do that on a regular basis. So I'll just also show you what this looks like in terms of the backend. As I'm working on it, so I have access. So I'll just share. If anyone who has used like WordPress, this is how this works. So I can update and add new data over here, and each data is like, these are all the events which have been shared, and these are the categories like performance, workshop, talks, and this is where I can add the tag for each event. So this is how the backend for the Conflictorium archives work. In terms of adding new data, I'll just show you what that looks like. So while working with the developers, we also figured out what are the fields which need to be pre-decided and where we'll have the liberty to add more fields in future. So for example, over here, the information goes as a description, but categories can be added new in future in case they have a new category of event. Like the image thumbnail, the poster image goes as it is. They can add more photos, videos, those kind of information they can add. The 3D embed was not yet possible at that time, so we didn't add it, but it can always be added as a new object over here. So any future archive, if they want to add it, they can always add it over here. But this is the overall structure of if I have to enter a new entry onto the archive. Anyone has any questions, I can answer them parallelly. I'll show the Women of Vastukala website after this. Okay, I'll present then if we don't have any questions as of now. Just let me go back to the, yeah. This is what Women of Vastukala website looks like. Me and Ishita, we had worked on this together. So she had showed me what she is envisioning, and it was quite a interesting project because to be able to understand what Ishita is imagining the website to look like, and for me to be able to translate that visually was a great learning for me. There were a lot of conversations, and I imagine that we developed this as we talked. The more we talked, the more the website shaped. So that was a great learning for me. The website is designed in 3 ways. I will get into the details of why we have this section and it's represented like this. But overall, we have the list of women practitioners within the field of architecture over here. So the moment you reach this archive, you actually just see the names. And if you click on any of these names, you get to know more about this women practitioner. So a little bit description about the practitioner. So Ishita had interviewed a bunch of people for each architect. So we have 3 levels of information for this particular archive. So for example, Balwinder Saini, the interview is also the same person. We have more audio oral histories for each women practitioner over here. So if I click on each, I'm also looking at this after a very long time. So I'm glad to see that everything is there, and I'm very happy to see the whole archive. But you can listen to the oral histories of each women architect over here. The search section of this website works it's slightly differently because it only shows the oral histories. So for example, if I search Balwinder, I think if I have to type the spelling correct. Yeah, so it will only show me the oral histories of Balwinder Saini, but the title, the title of the clip is It's not the name of the architect, it's the name of the clip. So this is one of the things we were figuring out at that time, and this is the resolution we had come up with at that moment. This is what each oral history page looks like. So you have information about the oral history, you have information about the practitioner, interviewee, interviewer, the duration, mode, date, and the language. You also have option to go like back and forth into, if you want to listen to a new archive, if you want to listen to a different, like the previous oral history. So they are connected in that sense. Um, Going back to the idea of this, um, this is sort of like the key, as going back to how we had reached a position where we had an Excel sheet for Conflictorum archive. This is the document which Ishita had shared with me initially, and this made a lot of sense because of my prior experience of working on archives. This sort of helped me understand what is the structure we are imagining. And from there, we built further in terms of to understand what the archive structure looks like. So, you have first women practitioner, then you have the interviews for that practitioner, and then you have the oral histories archive. That was the kind of structure for the archive. The third section, initially, we were thinking that we will be able to have to be able to search the practitioner and the histories together, but WordPress had some limitations, and we had to resolve to only do the searchable section for the oral histories. I'm still exploring on how we can achieve this in other projects, but this is the overall like technicalities. uh, One of the initial sketches when I had a conversation with Ishita was like to understand why and like how we need to go about the project. And from her, like I could understand that um, like I remember one of the conversations was that this archives need to be like a book, like a notebook, and then how you flip through the pages of the notebook. So usually I work on like straight lines and a lot of straight lines in terms of when I'm thinking of different kind of things. But the wireframing of this evolved from a sketch. So I really like to show this before we get into all of this, the how the rest of the section went. But this sort of helped me understand the kind of visual we might be getting into for the archives. So this is the idea for the home page. This is what the architect page might look like, how the SoundCloud file for the audio clip page could look like. So this is like initial sketch of what all number of pages which might be there on the website. uh, Getting into the visual design, again, like the colors were thought after a lot of deliberation, and just thinking about how the women practitioner are perceived. And at some point we were also having discussions on it doesn't need to look too soft or too women like. So we resolved to these cold colors at some point, and the texture of the background is also kind of giving a sense of like it could be like a paper like theme. So these were like some of the ideas we had taken. um, this is what the prototyping looked like. We had a lot of trial and error in developing. By each conversation we had like more refined defining of the website. I'll go back to this. So some of the these are some of the initial ideas of like having a horizontal scroll, maybe, of being able to as you flip through a book horizontally. So this was like one of the ideas which we had. Some visual explorations of the imagery and visual content we had for the website. So these are some initial ideas of how the image can play. And because this again represents memory, and a lot of conversations about the architects were about how their journey and personal life was. So kind of thinking of how the photographs and like the kind of feel photographs have. So these were some initial ideas of what that visual direction could be like. Um, and some initial ideas of what the search section could look like. So yeah, going back to the presentation. Yeah, this is what the last bit I want to talk about is the responsiveness for this website, I think we spent quite a lot of time figuring out how it can be responsive. Uh, we did reach quite a lot of, like, to a stage where we have this is what it looks like on phone. So for example, if I'm going over the website on phone, this is what it will look like, and I can click on each section and I get the same amount of information, and it looks quite like it's easy to access on our phone as well. So I think that is very important when you're developing any archive. So yeah, I think this is almost the end of the presentation. That's it. I'll go back to, yeah. Yeah, I think almost done. Like, this is the end. Okay, same.
Thank you so much, Shrishti, for taking us through such in-depth steps of your process. And I'm glad that maybe this presentation has also allowed you to make the matrix which you tried to at the beginning, and I hope it keeps resolving and we'll learn more from you. Again, I can start, but I don't want to be the one claiming the space. So questions from other participants. These could be very technical questions to even your own projects, because I think Shrishti's shown us quite a bit of variety. Shrishti, do you want to stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, I'll just do that one second.
So we can see raised hands or unmuted mics together.
Yeah.
Tony has raised hand.
Yeah, it was not the virtual, it was the real hand.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I can understand that you have really gone into the finer details and thought about what the project should look like to arrive at the right look for every project. I'm struggling with my website. Okay, I keep thinking I wish someone else were, to make these decisions for me. So right from logo, I ask someone to make one logo. That person gives me 4 options. All of them are same, but the colors and everything are different. And I can see that they are in a way slightly different, but I cannot put a finger on what is different. Okay, so right from logo to which theme, this was not WordPress, this is some other platform. It's just so, I feel, I should be focusing more on, my Excel sheet. Earlier I hated Excel sheet. Now compared to, these design decisions, my
Yeah.
Excel sheet looks better. So what should lesser mortals like me do when it comes to design and thinking about design?
I think, see, in terms of each archive is very different and how you approach it, right? And it also depends on what is your content. Like, what are you really trying to show? Like, for example, if you are talking about Sindhi, literature and talking about that, there will be, like, you can always pick cues from what is already there. Your content is books, like, you have it in front of you. So just like, I think inspiration can come from there itself. Like, it doesn't have to follow the lines of what you already see on the websites and what the current websites look like, because they are coming from a different point of view. Like, even like for institutional archives, they have a certain format of doing things because they are institutional archive and they serve a very different purpose. I feel like for personal archives, that sense of, like, that it is coming from a place, like the idea which you told initially, like that story needs to be woven through the visual. That that is something which I feel is very important. Even for like women of Vastukala, when we are working on about pages, I'd asked Ishita to share her, like, sketches and like the kind of images she has, because that helps to understand, how you work as an individual as well, and that can be built further over on the website, because it's not an independent thing. It's an extension of what you are thinking of your archive to be like. So what your ideologies are will shape what your website would look like.
I think I need a translator in between my idea, the vision that I have, and what how user friendly and at least pleasing, the least
So
bit.
one of the things I usually do is I ask, like for example, even for Rishita, I had asked her to share a few reference links because that visually helps to understand that what you like on a website or what you don't like on a website. Because if you yourself, for example, if you like, conflictorium archives, so I kind of like this website. Maybe iska visuals look nice, or maybe iska colors look nice. These prompts help the designer also to just understand what is your preference in terms of different kind of styles of um, interaction, navigation, all of those. So finding these common grounds of communication is important, because otherwise it feels like you both are talking in different languages and you are not able to understand each other. So
Thank you.
I think both the things that you said are important, Sony. One is, yes, if you feel that there's a mediation required, if your designer is the designer you want to work with, that's something that I have understood in other projects, not in my own project, but the role of a curator being that you really become the person who can um, bridge languages, as rightly Shristi said. There's sometimes really a need to. So one of the projects that Shristi hasn't shown because we weren't able to complete it is the biome archives. Now over there, apart from curating the publication, the role I played with curating the archives, because archiving was done by the time we finished the publication. So, but what role I sort of played till we managed between Shishti, the web developing team, and the architects was of this communication, which still fell apart for whatever reasons. But that was financial technicalities, not so much in terms of what we like and what we wanted to see. So this intangible conceptual feels of something, that's something that definitely could use a mediator. But second, I would also want to put some weight on the kind of visual designer that you work with. Now, all visual designers or all designers who do visual communication cannot do all kinds of visual design projects. And I'm saying this with a very humble heart. I don't mean to say it with any. I'm not trying to demean anybody. So when we worked with a very small grant internally on the Humpy archiving project, I think both the visual designer and I were aware of our capabilities, because there the idea was that the grant has come from collaborators who are providing us the platform, and we were supposed to deliver the content in the most visually communicable form. So this was not the same collaboration as Shishti working with Ullas as a web developer and both of them trying to achieve our vision. So when this mechanism changed, and the fact that the visual designer over here is more trained to work with static forms like posters and graphics and books, so they would only be able to deliver that. So what you see then on the Humpy archiving project is our best interpretation of a vision, but still more static and working with scale or play of scales and proportions and what kind of elements. Now, if I wanted to think of, can that element become alive or can become agile, or a certain text will move to another certain text, I don't think we both as a team were the right people. So I am very, very conscious of the fact that each designer or each historian, we would say this for historians, for example, or researchers, that somebody who's trained into humanist studies is not going to be able to do scientific. So that applies to visual design as much, or to architecture, that they are not really umbrella fields in that sense. Somebody needs to invest into a certain field. So those who can do set design, I don't think those who do normal interior design can do set design.
yeah,
So these
that's
are
true.
two key things. Yeah.
Adding to what Ishita was mentioning, like even with respect to development, there are a lot of stages. Like, what the archives looks in the front is done by somebody else. What the archives looks in the back, like the WordPress backend, is done by usually someone else. So these also, like, there are subsections of each of these domains. Like even with respect to design, the visual design skill set someone might have, but the experience design skill set is a different thing. Like for me to be able to design a logo can be one thing, but for me to be able to design the interface of a website can be a different thing. So not the sometimes, like a lot of times, not the same. Like you might not find the same designer who can do all of this. Like same thing goes with the development. Like i- these are again like very different skill sets. Even with respect to archiving, how the person who's doing the data entry will have a different skill set to the person who's curating the archive, right? So there are a lot of multiple channels, and like it's always a team effort. Like it cannot happen in isolation. Like, and you need to communicate your ideas like thoroughly.
Shristi, I think this is also a clue that you could have presented or shown what went behind in the logo design.
Oh,
Uh, if you want to look it up while
I
Shweta
would,
answers her
yeah, I
question.
would love to, but the thing is, I usually don't document my own personal work, so I'm bad at that. So I don't have a lot of data of like a lot of work which I've done. So
Okay, let me just see if I have those files. In the
yeah,
meanwhile, Shwetal and you can continue.
yeah, my hard disk actually they stopped working, so I've lost all my data. So
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Yes. Okay, I'll just look it up and Shwetal, you can take it forward until then.
No, I just was kind of contributing to the same thing because I think Sony somewhere I want to kind of talk to you about this because I have been on this project for now 2014 to 2023. So many years have gone by. Okay, and the emotional attachment that we have to our project also makes it difficult for us to take decisions. So now when I am longer into the project, I have dissociated, or I've become dispassionately attached to it, you know. I am into it, and so taking some of these decisions becomes a lot easier. So while I was in the first phase of it, I had so many more decisions to take, and I was unhappy with most decisions that I had taken. And now that I am like at a place where I know that some of the things are done, I can take my time, and there's a sense of urgency, but there is also a sense of understanding of how things take time to get done. So I can sense when I talk to somebody whether that person can do this or not. So that little bit of failure in the initial stage, I think, is part of the process, is all that I want to say, especially when you're attached to something. Because I think, Shrishti, I think you're working on a project which has been initiated by somebody else. So even taking those decisions at that level is very different as to taking decisions for a project that you have initiated. I can see that in my own work where I'm doing a client project. It's so much easier. I am being the designer. I can take decisions so easily. And even there, if the client is like a corporate or a person who's working in as part of a system, they find it easier to take decisions versus individuals. Like you work with somebody who's making a house and you're doing an artwork for a house or something. Those people will take much longer to take decisions than people who are doing it for an office. You know, so I just feel that these things also kind of play a role in these things. And the other thing that I have been thinking of in like between the last session and this, Ishita, which was about communities, not yeah, that I think reaching out to our own community, because they will understand our they will one give us a feedback on our aesthetics related to our plan, and also they may be open to helping us in some ways with all these things. I don't know, Ishita. I mean, that is what I am now thinking of. I mean, those channels have opened in my mind after that community workshop. That you know,
Yes, I can't agree more that even for the professional projects that I am working on, more and more I'm realizing, and I think a little bit for me, it's to do with the fellowship with Nato Thompson, where the first question of the workshops or the seminars was about how much does your work matter to your immediate circles. And I thought, not just matter, I mean, yes, why would it matter if only if they're contributing? So I think the fact that we have distanced our own practices from our own immediate networks, or not just our but the immediate network of that project,
yeah,
and then we start thinking about its global presence and we think about its impact, but first the people themselves around it. And this is very similar a trend. I mean, we might be using different words, whether it's we say community narratives, whether we say people's archive of rural India or farmers protest. I think we're somewhere changing the trend. We're saying let's make these projects for the people whom it matters to, and eventually automatically it will matter to the world if it matters to the people. Yeah, I agree with you. So even for something like women of Vastukala or Hampi, these personally driven projects, we've somehow managed to work with, or we've been keen on working with people who feel for the cause. So even when Shristi says that, that she's been working or been interested in gender politics, hence her interpretation of the website really works in a certain way, rather than having another good website designer, kind of a thing. Similarly, Fiona or Purnima. So I don't want to get into people's personal narratives, but somewhere you feel in reflection that, yes, they have had their own experiences as young architects or graduates, and that's where they see some merit in the project. Uh, it does make sometimes collaborations difficult, because then you wait for that click or that right person to come on board, but it happens eventually. Yes, it does. Shishti, I do have the PDF, interestingly. So while others might be thinking of their questions or formulating it, I'm just going to quickly share it, and you can tell what it felt like. One second. Okay, I hope you all are able to see the PDF. This is the very early on one. After this, of course, there was one more round of it, if I'm correct.
Yeah, there was. This is like a initial ideas which we had thought of. So I think, are there more? I think there should be more.
Yes. So we can scroll down.
Yeah. So like initial ideas on what it could be like again. So when you're working with archives or like museum, it's like I find it a very daunting place, because I'm designing the visuals for a very powerful space. So like my discomfort is in that space itself. Like this also happened with the Conflictorium archives, or even with Women of Vastukala. Like this is such a powerful position. You're representing women in Indian architecture, and you're making a logo for that. So a lot of hesitation is there. So these are like some initial thought lines. They're not refined, but some ideas of what it could be like. The how can we play with the letters? How can we play with the forms? The ideas of how Ishita was mentioning that it could be a notebook, or it could be a thought process. But this is like, these are not refined. These are just there to understand what Ishita might be going towards. Like maybe she might like the idea or narrative for one, but she might not like the visuals. Like that's totally fine, because this is the first time her looking at a visual interpretation of what she had been thinking of. So it's just good to have a lot of back and forth in terms of like putting your ideas out of like, maybe this is not the right approach, or maybe I don't like this, or I prefer this. Um, there was a lot of conversation of women, even when we were deciding the name, the amount of back and forth we had done for the name itself was a lot. But it also comes back to the point of like you deciding the name is like a crucial point. Like it's like you are establishing this institution, not even institution if you don't call it, but it's still like it's a powerful thing to do. So at this point, I think we were still figuring out what the name could be, Women of Vastukala or Vastukala in Women Architecture. So there were a lot of conversations happening about what to put first, what to put after, and all of these conversations. So I think we did think about all of that around this time as well. Like I think a lot of things were in conversation with the name as well.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's a very valid point, that the processes also overlap. The name, building defining the name of the options that we had, and then will it work in the graphics? So sometimes graphics can also help you decide whether a name will work, and vice versa. So we have been taking decisions parallelly, if I might call it so. That's one important thing. And I think the most important thing, because Shrishti is very kind to keep saying Ishita, but all of this was on WhatsApp. So this community building, because Shwetal brought it, whatever be your smallest community or team, irrespective of how short or long their role is, irrespective of their eligibility criteria or age. I'm just speaking of values right now at Curating for Culture. Everybody was involved in agreeing or disagreeing with what we liked or what we didn't like. So, and I'm very conscious of it, that there were no veto calls over here, even though I've sort of become the face of the project. But that's also because it's just that the grant was given to me and I did the oral histories. But that's really the 50% of the work. 50% remains, which is editing, transcribing, summarizing, metadata mapping, and then of course the website design and development. So one has also been conscious that it, you're not just in making a team role specific, but involving them into taking decisions. And why I'm emphasizing on this is because it really makes it lighter and easier. If I had to do it all by myself, I think it would have been very difficult to take a decision. These are very tough choices, especially when they're personal archiving projects. I think, as Shishti rightly said, you're thinking of how will you project it to the world. Yeah, here
I
they are.
think yeah, that is one of the conversations we had when we were actually designing this section, because we did not want it to have any sense of hierarchy. So we didn't want to have a linear form or any of those forms where some word is like someone's name is on top. So we had arrived at that we will use this
Form.
like form to have this. Initially, we had the idea that we will shuffle these basis whoever is accessing the website. I'm not sure if we were able to reach the development of that, but like subtle things as how do you mention the team also
Yeah.
matters. Like so it, it's not only what you see on the front page, but it also means like till the end of the pages what and how consciously you have thought about each detail. So
And the other side of this entire conversation is also to be open to changes. And so, even in team members, somebody else has joined us whose data will be uploaded. And because this uh, circular form, is now a question of development, the next name is going to come right now in the bottom of this form. So somewhere also, as much as we're talking about hitting the right nail, because the project will be seen by a lot of people and it will have quote unquote national importance or whatever, I think we eventually also learn in this process that things will reiterate. So I think even during these conversations or even other projects, we keep laughing that we'll design keeping in mind that we will like it or we'll appreciate our own decisions for 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. And then, yes, it will change or it should change. So what Shwetal said, that, her own initial decisions might seem now a problem to her. And that's the proof of the fact that we are living forms and so are these projects. And it happens both at institutional level, community level, or at individual level. So the pressure also should not be to that 3 months or 2 months of your process, you have to get it all right. Do it, see it. Once you see it in execution, and then once people work with it, operate it, 3 years, 3 months, 3 years later, you might feel you want to do something else with it. Sure, identities can change and people adapt to it, warm up to it.
Shwetal, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. If you don't mind, I just wanted to share something slightly humorous. Sorry, I'm on the phone because I can't sit on the chair now because I'm not feeling too great and I'm sitting on the bed. No, so while when I made the documentary, I was looking at a font for the titles, and I didn't have money for a graphic designer, and me and my editor worked, and we kept looking at fonts. What font should I use? What font? Eventually, he gave me Papyrus. Now, if you're a designer, you know how that font is looked at, okay? And I said, okay, temporary chalate hain because it's ancient history. This that I'll keep it now, and that stayed. Okay, that stayed because I just couldn't find anybody to do it. And it is the most embarrassing thing for me every time the film starts or every time I see my poster. The only redeeming factor is that Avatar has the same font. Avatar has Papyrus, and they had a huge budget. So I'm like, okay, I'm in some league, if not the league I want to be in.
So nice way of
so,
yeah. Sony, I hope we have given you enough confidence to go ahead and redesign your website with all
Yeah,
the
I hope
ifs
we
and
can,
buts.
jointly pick each other's brains when we.
Yes.
I don't know, what's your plan next? Will there be another version of this workshop before May so that we
Yes,
show
of
the
course.
background? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sixth workshop will be on outputs and forms of outputs. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Shamsher, over to you.
Hi. Thank you, Shristi, for very interesting, points which you took us through, and a lot of it like kind of resonated as we struggled, at various stages of negotiations with the web developer, and who will call the who will take the final decisions, and it's such an interesting process which makes you think about the power, the mandate, the visions, the ownership, everything is so complex in this process. And I just wanted to, rather than giving a speech, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how do you see, how important it is for the curator and the web developer to share the vision, the vision of the project, and how I was really lucky to work with Azra, who was fantastic in her in her politics, in her positions, that it didn't need much of a negotiation. But do you think that personal projects versus corporate projects differ in the sense like how invested the parties are and what kind of output comes along?
I definitely think that like the way I approach my commercial projects is very different from what you have seen on the presentation right now. I think I've learned this the hard way, because usually as a designer you always try to put your heart into everything.
Yeah.
But late realization that you don't have to do that for everything. You only do that where you really want to put your heart in. Like, so I've realized like I also need to have a balance of the kind of work I really love to do and the balance of the kind of work I will have to do as the industry demands. So in terms of, same thing applies for a developer. Like, there you will find developers who are genuinely interested in the kind of work you do, and then you'll find the developers who are doing it as a service. So I've had the opportunity to work with both, and both have gone fine depending on the work you do. Like, for example, if you look at conflictorium archives, or women of Vastukala, like when we are working with Ullas sort of understands, because he has done a lot of archival projects before. Like, he has that background of 10 years of experience. So it really helped in terms of like what we are trying to do. It also depends like how much of, you also need to understand how much you can push the boundaries for the developers also, because they are also in a space where they know certain expertise, but they also want to move away from certain things. So for example, if I just tell a developer that, let's just remove all the navigation and let's make something which is entirely different in terms of a website experience, the developer should be able to understand why this is needed. So there is a balance of when you are trying to break the website guides for a reason, and when you are just trying to do it for fun. Like, you need to understand where we need to draw that boundary. So certain decisions are taken by, in some places it's always a give and take. Like, where you really need to hold your ground and be like, no, this is something which needs to happen, and where you can let go and be like, maybe this is something we will come back to this later, and maybe this is not that required. And it also comes with a lot of understanding of what is really important for that archive or museum. Like, what are you really trying to communicate? So those things really matter, and you can see that depending on the kind of developer or designer you're working with, whether they are doing it as a commercial project or whether they are doing it as a project where they have some personal cause.
Right.
I personally love like exploring architecture, and I do want to know more about women practitioners in any kind of field. So when Ishita had reached out to me for this project, I was just genuinely interested to know more. I was like, at least I'll get to see more information and I'll get to learn more about the women architects in general. So that was sort of like a driving cause for me to just like get into this project. Same thing is there with the Conflictorium archives. Like that is an archive which I have worked like solely from the beginning. So it has everything. Every decision making of that project has taken so much of like this discomfort of like me making these big decisions, and I really don't know what these big decisions are. So I get what you are trying to mean, like.
Thank you.
You still need to have like a balance. You can decide on what projects you want a developer like that.
I mean, getting the right, right person for the right thing is, I think, is the need of, these times, and we need to develop also some sort of larger community, which if you put it in the very market terms, like finding the right skill for the right job, like matching of these.
Yeah, it's actually true, because I recently had an opportunity to actually not recruit, but like get people on board for one of the projects. I was working for a museum design at Raipur, and we were hiring new people. And I had this first-hand experience of how do you get new people into the team and what are you looking for. So, just apart from skills, you also need to understand, whether they align in the thought process.
Right.
What will they learn apart from just the skill sets, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's all of those things that count. So
definitely, we should like have a more regular form of communication and connecting with each other, like if possible. That will really, I think, enhance our own understanding about various processes.
Yeah, so we basically need milli sessions every month.
Yeah.
we can do that. Yeah.
The other example, a very short example which comes to my mind is when we were looking for somebody to replace me or take over from me when I was moving on from SEPTA archives. I think this example only becomes clear now. I don't think so. Somebody who had exactly done the kind of education almost, and like I had done, returned from UK looking for a position after doing architectural history. So you would imagine that they would also feel the same way. So obviously in that committee or decision making, when we had the applicants and then we had scheduled the interviews, HR and myself and another team member, we were all really counting on that person. But whatever be the reasons, the conversation didn't feel so approving of itself. And I and I met them very recently at a conference. To only hear back from them which is nice. I mean, it's good for people to be honest, but they are now into journalism, architectural journalism of a certain kind. And they sort of remarked to me saying that I'm so glad I didn't take it. I would have really bored out.
Yeah.
So it's so evident that it's not the qualification. And the person who really took over from me is a mass communication graduate. But with the experience of having done different kinds of project management roles, the blue book that I had made for them, they were able to appreciate it, that you have spent time to actually draw out every process for me, or either on PowerPoint or by hand, which I was comfortable, put sample papers and literally created a file which acted like a blue book.
This should be called manuals of maybe archive.
Manuals, yes, exactly. And exactly stepwise, because we really didn't get enough time for me, for us to co-work, which would have been ideal because the process took longer. So they stayed in touch also while I was in Bangalore, but the way they then ran the space for 3 years after my time was in itself very interesting, because then it was a different approach, but you felt for the cause. You're not even an architect, forget architectural historian. So that really validates the conversation that we're having right now, that it's beyond now skills. It's really so much about values, politics, your personal experiences, social environment. And I think that's itself a game changer in arts and humanities. So yeah, it just reflected in my head that yes, 10 years later, when you meet the same person and they say this, then you know, okay,
Yeah.
decision taken, correct decision taken,
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
and they're also happy where they are. So that's the
Yeah.
perfect thing. Yes.
Yeah.
You have not disappointed them by saying no to them,
Yeah. Definitely.
Anyone else with any other questions? Geeta ji, Nijum, anything that comes to your mind? Nijum, again, we hope you're feeling better. All of you attending these sessions while you are unwell is already a big thing. Shristi, I had one last question, which was to say that when I see your work across Chhatrapati Shivaji Museum to Conflictorium and then all the way down to whether it is Biome Archives or Women of Vastukala, you're working across scales from much bigger institutions to a semi institutional model like Conflictorium and then individual projects. How do you see archiving and visualization of archiving being interpreted differently or not? And what are the challenges that you see in that kind of shift of scales?
I think again, like this goes back to the philosophy of that individual institution or the the kind of work that is there. Um, One of the things which I've realized is like whatever work you are trying to do, whether it's archive or museum or whatever digital experience you are trying to create, um, there are certain parallels like the basic questions of design, what, how, who, all of those. If you answer correctly, you kind of understand what needs to be done and what the priorities are. Like for example, when I was working on CSMVS, they know what their goals are. Like it's a very it's good to have that clarity as an institution. So and you also understand how much amount of experimentation you can do across projects. Like for an institution like CSMVS, I don't think they have that much of liberty to make a very experimental website, right? Because it's accessed by a variety of people and variety of linguistic as well. Whereas Conflictorium, where their ideology itself is to break the norm and like try something unconventional, it works. Like the approach is very different for them. So like even when we were thinking of archives as a word and like as an institution itself, we were deconstructing that form only. It also came to a point where you do write who has taken this photograph, but just clicking that photograph wouldn't be possible only by that photographer. Somebody would have helped him to do that. Where are those names coming in? So you know those kind of decision makings and all of those. So to go into the finer details and implement the same ideology kind of makes a lot more personalized institutional or individual archives. So that applies across regardless of how big the website needs to be or how small the institution needs to be. So,
That's a very beautiful thought with which you are ending the session, that personalization doesn't only have to be when you're working with family or small scale archives. You could, and I think Nijum is a very good example of the team that's sitting here, at least in the current scenario where her involvement with Bitro Art Trust is coming, is an institutional job in a way as an archivist. But I think the fact that you can personalize it by deepening your interest and giving it all your um, blood and sweat.
Institutional archives doesn't necessarily have to be like objective because you still know who has worked behind it. Like it's not like that person is not visible. Like so
Venkat is another good example at archives at NCBS.
So it's like I don't like there aren't any standpoints which are like purely objective. So
nice.
So,
I think only difference may be a little more operational because there will always be a committee watching over, so your decisions are not just seen by people who feel for the cause, but people who
always. I realized this from NID only. Like like even institutions have their own standpoints, so like it's fine.
Yeah, and it's sometimes these practices, at least I can speak for myself, can be a way to also protest to those values at the institution. A little bit of it, what we could try with Sept Archives, accept. was important.
Yeah, I think that's good. Like it's just good to have such spaces then, right?
Yes, that's true. Yes, finding standpoint itself is very difficult. Yes.
I understand that question very well. So yeah.
And standpoints can change. There's no harm in that either.
Yeah. It can evolve,
Great.
it can change. So
Yes, we
nothing
all
is
change.
constant in
Yes,
that.
this whole idea that everything has to be constant and we have to put things in writing and never change them, I think that itself is a big
Yeah.
problem in itself, and most of our work is questioning it.
I think that's great because right now, like if you look at archives also, their structures are also changing, right? Like if you
Exactly.
look at earlier archives, if you look at Nagma and like how everything needed to be in a certain order and like, like there was so much of precision and foresight of like this is what it is.
Mm.
And whereas to we see archives engaging with people now and like transforming, which is like great to start from like.
Yeah, it's more fluid, definitely.
Yeah.
Great. So, with that, we'll all hope that the archiving projects that we all keep building are more fluid, more inclusive, and still should and convey viewpoints or standpoints. If they have to be a bit more activist, if they have to be a bit more comforting, they can have those emotions as well. Thank you, Shristi. Thank you, Shamsher, for this very nice Sunday morning. And I'm sure that this recording, I mean, as much as people have missed out, will be of use to those who have missed out, but it'll be of interest to others as well.